Pharmacy employee insults a white-haired old woman for buying with coins, not aware that Keanu Reeves is looking at her closely. It was a quiet afternoon in a small Los Angeles pharmacy. The air smelled of antiseptic and freshly stocked shelves. Keanu Reeves, dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans, stood in line, waiting to buy some bandages and vitamins. He had just finished a workout and decided to stop by before heading home. Ahead of him stood an elderly woman with soft white hair, slightly hunched but still moving with quiet dignity. She clutched a small basket with a bottle of aspirin and a carton of milk. As she reached the counter, she carefully pulled out a small coin purse and started counting change with shaky hands. The young cashier, a woman in her early 20s, let out an impatient sigh. She tapped her long nails against the counter and rolled her eyes. "Ma'am, seriously, you're paying with coins? We're in 2025, not the Stone Age." The old woman flinched, embarrassment washing over her face. She tried to count faster, but her hands trembled. A few coins slipped from her grasp, clinking against the floor. Customers behind her started mumbling, some shifting uncomfortably. Keanu Reeves narrowed his eyes, watching everything unfold. His hands clenched slightly, but he stayed silent. The cashier sighed dramatically. "Look, I don't have all day. Maybe come back when you have real money." The elderly woman's face turned red with shame. She bent down slowly to pick up the fallen coins, but her frail hands struggled. A few customers averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. Just then, a calm but firm voice cut through the tension. "Let me help you with that." Keanu Reeves knelt beside the woman, picking up the scattered coins with gentle hands. He handed them back to her with a warm smile. The old woman looked up, her eyes widening as she recognized him. "Oh, she began, but Keanu simply winked. He then turned to the cashier. His expression was kind, but his tone carried quiet authority. "You know, respect doesn't cost a thing, but a little kindness, that can change someone's entire day." The cashier blinked, suddenly realizing who was standing in front of her. Her face turned pale. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't." Keanu reached into his wallet and placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. "This should cover her groceries, and whatever she needs in the future. Put it on my tab." The old woman gasped. "Oh, no, dear, I couldn't possibly." Keanu gently patted her hand. "Please, let me." The store had fallen completely silent. Other customers now looked at the scene with admiration, some even ashamed that they hadn't stepped in sooner. The cashier swallowed hard, her attitude shifting. "I'm really sorry, ma'am. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." The elderly woman gave her a kind smile. "We all have bad days, dear. Just try to be a little more patient next time." As Keanu helped the woman with her bag, she whispered, "You're a good man, Mr. Reeves." Keanu chuckled softly, just doing what's right. And with that, he walked her out of the store, proving once again that being a real hero isn't about playing one on screen. It's about showing kindness when no one expects it. As Keanu Reeves walked the elderly woman out of the store, he noticed how her hands still trembled slightly as she held onto the bag of groceries. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet street. "Do you live nearby?" he asked gently. The woman nodded. "Just a few blocks away. I usually walk, but my legs aren't as strong as they used to be." Keanu smiled. "Then allow me to be your escort." Her eyes twinkled with gratitude. "Oh my, what a gentleman. My late husband used to do the same for me." They walked together at a slow, steady pace, Keanu matching her steps. Along the way, she shared small pieces of her life. Her name was Margaret. She had lost her husband 5 years ago, and her children lived in different states, too busy with their own families to visit often. "It gets lonely sometimes," she admitted softly. Keanu nodded, understanding more than she knew. He had faced his own share of loss. His best friend, his lover, even his child. Loneliness was something he understood deeply. "I get that," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But kindness has a way of making the world feel a little less lonely." Margaret smiled warmly. "You're right, and today you reminded me of that." They reached her small apartment building, and Keanu insisted on carrying her groceries up to her door. Inside, the place was modest but filled with warmth. Old photos, knitted blankets, and a faint scent of lavender. "Would you like a cup of tea before you go?" Margaret offered. Keanu hesitated, then smiled. "You know what? That sounds perfect. As they sat by the window sipping tea and sharing stories, Keanu realized something. Sometimes the most meaningful moments weren't the big Hollywood premieres or blockbuster roles. Sometimes they were just quiet evenings with a kind soul, reminding each other that goodness still existed in the world. Before he left, Margaret patted his hand. Thank you, Keanu. Not just for today, but for being the kind of person who notices when someone needs a little help. Keanu gave her a gentle squeeze in return. Take care of yourself, Margaret, and if you ever need anything, just let me know. As he stepped out into the night, a peaceful smile crossed his face. He didn't need the world to know what had happened today. He just needed to know that, in a small way, he had made it a little brighter. And that was enough. As Keanu Reeves walked down the quiet street, he felt a rare sense of peace. The city lights flickered in the distance, but his thoughts remained on Margaret, the gentle kindness in her eyes, the way she had thanked him as if he had done something extraordinary. To him, it wasn't extraordinary. It was just the right thing to do. As he reached the corner, a voice called out from behind him. Mr. Reeves, wait. He turned to see the young cashier from the pharmacy running toward him, out of breath. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry for how I acted back there, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know why I was so impatient. I guess I was just having a bad day, but that doesn't excuse how I treated her. Keanu studied her for a moment, then gave her a small nod. Bad days happen. What matters is how you move forward. The cashier looked down, embarrassed. I wish I could apologize to her properly. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notepad and wrote something down. He tore off the page and handed it to her. This is Margaret's address. If you really mean it, go visit her. Bring her flowers or some tea. Show her that today wasn't who you really are. The young woman looked at the paper, then back at Keanu, her eyes filled with determination. I will. Thank you, Mr. Reeves, for everything. Keanu smiled and patted her shoulder before walking off into the night. A few days later, Margaret sat in her cozy apartment humming to herself as she watered her small collection of plants by the window. There was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found the young cashier standing there, holding a bouquet of bright yellow daisies. Miss Margaret, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was rude to you the other day, and I regret it. I hope you can forgive me. Margaret's eyes softened as she reached out and squeezed the girl's hand. Oh dear, of course, I forgive you. Come in, let's have some tea. As they sat together talking and laughing, the young cashier realized something. Kindness wasn't just about making up for mistakes. It was about making a choice every day to be better than before. And somewhere Keanu Reeves, wherever he was, would have smiled knowing that one simple act of kindness had set off a ripple that made the world just a little bit better. A week had passed since the incident at the pharmacy. Keanu Reeves had gone about his usual routine, morning rides on his motorcycle, script readings, and quiet moments in his favorite bookstores. Yet, his mind often drifted back to Margaret. One evening, as he walked through the neighborhood, he decided to check in on her. Carrying a small brown bag filled with some fresh fruit and a few books he thought she might enjoy, he made his way to her apartment. When he knocked on the door, Margaret's familiar warm voice greeted him. Oh, Keanu, what a wonderful surprise! She beamed, stepping aside to let him in. Her apartment felt cozier than before, filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies. But what truly caught Keanu's attention was the presence of someone else, the young cashier from the pharmacy. She was sitting at the small dining table pouring tea into 2 cups, her face glowing with happiness. I see you've made a new friend, Keanu said with a knowing smile. Margaret chuckled. Oh yes. This sweet girl Emily has been visiting me every few days. We've had such lovely conversations. Emily looked up at Keanu, her eyes filled with gratitude. I wanted to thank you again, Mr. Reeves. Meeting Margaret has been a blessing. She's teaching me how to bake, and I've been helping her set up video calls with her children. I can't believe how much I almost missed out on, just because I was impatient that day. Keanu placed the brown bag on the table and took a seat. He looked at Margaret, then at Emily, and felt a warmth in his chest. You see, a little kindness goes a long way. Sometimes it even comes full circle. Margaret patted Keanu's hand and smiled. It's funny how life works, isn't it? You stepped in that day thinking you were helping me, but in the end, you helped all of us." Keanu let out a soft chuckle. "Guess that makes me a matchmaker for unexpected friendships." The three of them spent the evening sharing stories, laughter, and freshly baked cookies. As Keanu finally got up to leave, Margaret stopped him at the door. She reached up and gave him a small hug. "You've got a good heart, Keanu. Don't ever change." He smiled and returned the hug. "You take care, Margaret. And Emily, keep being kind." With one last wave, he stepped out into the night, the city lights flickering in the distance. He didn't need headlines or recognition. This, small moments of kindness, human connection, was what truly mattered. And somewhere in the city, an old woman and a young cashier sat together, proof that even the smallest acts of compassion could change lives. As Keanu Reeves walked back home under the soft glow of the city lights, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet fulfillment. He had spent years in Hollywood, surrounded by flashing cameras and scripted stories, but this real, unscripted moment of kindness was what truly made life meaningful. A few days later, Keanu was sitting at his favorite coffee shop, quietly reading a book when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." A familiar warm voice greeted him. "Keanu, dear, it's Margaret." Keanu smiled. "Margaret, it's good to hear from you. How are you?" "Oh, I'm doing wonderfully. I just wanted to tell you something that I thought might bring a smile to your face." Keanu leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "I'm listening." Margaret chuckled. "Well, ever since that day at the pharmacy, Emily has been visiting me regularly. But that's not all. She introduced me to her grandmother, who also lives alone. Can you believe it? We've started having weekly tea gatherings with a few other elderly neighbors in my building. It turns out there are so many of us who just needed a little company." Keanu's heart swelled with warmth. "Margaret, that's amazing. And do you want to know something even more special?" "Of course. Emily is applying to be a volunteer at a local senior center now. She says she wants to make up for lost time by helping others who might be feeling lonely." Keanu exhaled in disbelief, shaking his head with a smile. One small moment, one simple act of kindness had rippled outwards, touching lives in ways he never expected. "That's incredible, Margaret. I'm really proud of her. And of you." Margaret's voice softened. "No, Keanu, it's all because of you. You reminded us that kindness still exists in the world. And because of that, we've all found something special." Keanu felt a lump in his throat but simply chuckled. "I think we all reminded each other." They spoke a little longer before Margaret finally said, "All right, dear. I won't keep you any longer. Just know that you always have a place at our tea table. Anytime." "I'll hold you to that, Margaret. Take care." As he hung up, he looked out at the bustling city around him. So many people, so many lives, all moving too fast to notice the quiet moments in between. But he noticed. And he always would. Because kindness wasn't just something you gave once. It was something you carried with you. Something that spread in ways you could never predict. And as he sipped his coffee, Keanu Reeves couldn't help but think. In a world obsessed with fame and fortune, perhaps the most extraordinary thing a person could be was simply kind. The end. A few months had passed since that fateful day at the pharmacy, and life carried on as usual for Keanu Reeves. He continued his work, traveling for film projects and making occasional public appearances, but every now and then, his thoughts drifted back to Margaret and the unlikely chain of kindness that had unfolded. One chilly afternoon, while riding his motorcycle through the city, he found himself near Margaret's neighborhood. Smiling to himself, he decided to make an unannounced visit. When he knocked on her door, he was greeted not just by Margaret, but also by a small gathering of elderly folks and young volunteers, chatting over cups of tea. The living room had been rearranged to accommodate more guests, and the once quiet apartment now felt alive with warmth and laughter. "Keanu, my dear," Margaret exclaimed, her face lighting up. Keanu stepped inside, taking in the sight of familiar and new faces. Emily was there too, balancing a tray of freshly baked cookies. "Mr. Reeves! What a surprise!" Margaret chuckled as she gestured around the room. "Well, as you can see, our little tea gatherings have grown. Word got around and now we have a whole group. Some of these fine folks were feeling lonely, just like I was, but now we all have each other. Keanu took a seat, feeling a deep sense of joy. He listened to their stories. Some spoke of the past, reminiscing about old love and adventures, while others talked about their new friendships and the joy of finding purpose in later years. Emily, who had once been an impatient cashier, had become one of the most dedicated volunteers, spending her free time organizing activities and helping the elderly with errands. As the afternoon passed, Keanu found himself completely at peace, sipping tea, sharing laughs, and simply enjoying the company of kind souls. Before leaving, he turned to Margaret. "You know, I think you've created something really special here." Margaret smiled, squeezing his hand. "It all started with you, dear. You reminded us that kindness is always worth sharing." Keanu chuckled. "Well, you've taken it and made it something even better." Margaret handed him a small tin of cookies. "Here, take these for the road. And remember, there's always a seat at our table for you." Keanu grinned, tipping an imaginary hat. "I'll be back for more tea, I promise." As he stepped outside and put on his helmet, he glanced back one last time, watching the warm glow of laughter and connection spill from Margaret's window. He revved up his bike and rode off, the city stretching before him. Fame, fortune, and Hollywood would always be a part of his life, but in that moment, Keanu Reeves knew true happiness wasn't about being a star. It was about being human. And sometimes, all it took was a little kindness to change the world, one heart at a time. The real story wasn't in the movies, it was in the moments in between. The end, or rather, just the beginning.